women continue to hold only about 26.5% of parliamentary seats worldwide. Today we will discuss the primary obstacles to women's representation in politics, as well as global efforts to facilitate their participation in democratic processes and to tackle violence and harassment against women candidates and politicians. To discuss all of this, we're joined online by 4 members of Parliament. Firstly, however, it's my great pleasure to invite Donatella Pribas here in studio to give some opening remarks and introduce our guests. Donatella is joining us on behalf of Sana Lepola, the Director General for Parliamentary Democracy Partnerships of the European Parliament. Over to you, Donatella.
Thank you, Jim, and again, good morning, good afternoon to all the participants. First of all, I would like to convey the really sincere apologies of our Director General, Sana Lepola, who unfortunately cannot be here with us today due to a very, very last-minute scheduling change with a current event. The topic of this event is a matter that is extremely close to her heart. She is very sorry not to be able to be here today. Welcome to the fantastic speakers that we are having with us today from Europe, but also from the US, Indonesia, and Tanzania. Welcome to our audience, also from across the world. This event is a result of the presence of the European Parliament on the ground, in Washington, D.C., in Jakarta, in Addis Ababa, and of course, in Brussels. Jim mentioned some chilling facts about super election year 2024, with national election in at least 64 countries, including Indonesia last month. In addition, with the European Parliament election in June, US voters will head to the polls in November. At this point, with these elections coming up, it's frightening that one of the most threatening things to our democracies is violence against women in politics. Violence can be physical, psychological, sexual, economic, semiotic. Violence can range from insults to threats to physical violence. There is a large body of data which shows violence prevents women from running for political offices, or in elections, or in dealing with controversial files. This kind of violence increases in particular during pre-election periods. Authoritarian rulers around the world are leading the effort to erode women's rights and women's political representation. Growing political, physical, and strategic pressure, gender disinformation, and online harassment of women candidates have a drastic effect on their political involvement. Today, I'm very proud to introduce our speakers, high-ranking legislators from across the world, all women, yes, all women, who each, in their own way, work tirelessly to empower other women to participate in politics across the world. Their different perspectives on today's topic complement each other. In addition to covering a lot of ground geographically, their combined experience and expertise offer a full and rich picture of the issues at stake, as well as of the solution that legislators can offer. It's our pleasure to have with us today Evin Incir, member of the European Parliament and co-rapporteur on the EU directive on combating violence against women and domestic violence. Neema Lugangira, member of the National Assembly of Tanzania, chair of the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance. Congresswoman Dina Titus, member of the US House of Representatives, Democratic ranking member, vice chair of the House Democracy Partnership. And Mercy Chriesty Barends, member of the House of Representatives of the Republic of Indonesia, chair of ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights. The aim of today's discussion is to shine a light on not only the obstacles, but also on already existing initiatives to empower women in politics across the world. In line with the mission of the Directorate General for Parliamentary Democracy Partnerships, we will also explore future paths for cooperation, focusing on how we can support each other in fighting the good fight to counter the backlash against visible women in politics. How he can share and export best practices, for example, by developing tools to increase women's participation and representation in politics, and in this way empower future generations of women candidates across the world to run for office.
Grazie, Donatella. Thank you. Now let's go to our panel discussion. Firstly, to Evin Incir, who is joining us from Stockholm. Evin, you are one of the European Parliament's lead negotiators on the first ever EU law to combat violence against women and domestic violence. The directive is expected to go to a final vote in the European Parliament next month. Can you give our viewers an overview of the proposed legislation?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me in this very important discussion that sheds the light on the importance of feminist policies being conducted, both the national level, European level, but of course also globally, because the development in different parts of the world is going hand in hand and is affecting each other. So this directive, piece of legislation which contains a different part of different legislation, so it's very comprehensive. It both prevents but also ensures to support women who are survivors of different kind of gender-based violence. One of them, of course, the topic that we are talking about today, violence against women in public position, women in legislated positions. A concrete example of how the legislation is targeting this kind of violence is that is making violence against women in politics, journalist women, human rights defender women, so violence against them to an aggravated circumstance, which means that it would lead to more stricter punishments, heavier punishment for those who are attacking women in public positions. And we see, of course, that this is both a threat, a violence against an individual's human rights, but also a threat and a violence against our democracy, because it is a threat to democracy when half of the population is constantly being deprived their fundamental rights, being deprived their voice. I have myself, for example, several times on social media platforms thought 1, 2, 3 times before I have posted something, because I'm aware that there will be sexist comments, there will be hate and encouragement to violence. But also, in my case, being a racialized woman, I know that there will be a lot of racism also. So in this context, also an intersectional perspective is important, which also is very clear in the directive.
Thank you. Sticking with you, Evin Incir, regrettably, violence against women is also a feature of political life, whether it be physical attacks, psychological abuse, sexual and sexist comments, or online hate speech. You're a first-term member of the European Parliament. You are running also in June's elections. Can you tell us about your own experience of being a woman in politics?
Well, definitely. I must say that a lot has happened during the last years, and not to the positive extent or development, but rather to the negative. 2006, I was actually running for the first time, I was running for a public position. I used to get a lot of letters home saying with sexistic but also racist comments. And still 2024 and 2023, last year, I got letters to both home and to my address in the parliament, but of course, most of all also nowadays on online platforms, a lot of sexist and racist comments. One thing that I have seen has happened in Sweden and the European Union is that back in 2006, all those letters were anonymous. Today, all those letters basically contains of a first name, a surname. In some cases, they even write the telephone numbers and a home address. That means that there is a normalization of these attacks on women in politics. So we need to really combat this heinous violence that deprives us women our fundamental rights, but also is an attack on democracy. And we need to work on awareness, we need to work with the legislation, and we need to work with support to women, and of course also ensure representation.
Thank you, Evin Incir. Over to Indonesia. Merci, Chriesty Barends. Of all the legislators taking part in today's discussion, you have the most recent experience of running for elected office, having been on the ballot paper as recently as 3 weeks ago when Indonesia went to the polls on the 14th of February. Can you tell us how was the experience of running for the election this time, and how did it compare to your first House of Representatives campaign a decade ago?
Thank you very much, James, for these questions. First of all, thank you very much for having me, inviting me. I'm very honored to participate in these important discussions. Okay, for these elections, I think, honestly, has been quite a difficult and eventful one. As you may know, that Indonesia's 2024 elections have been marked by allegations of abuse of power by our President Jokowi, who has tacitly backed the candidate Prabowo Subianto, his competitor in the 2 terms previously from different party, because President Jokowi comes from our party, and it's like a big turbulence in Indonesia in the political practices from national to the local level. As my party, Partai Demokrasi Indonesia Perjuangan, or Indonesian Democratic Party of Struggle, is backing another candidates as president's candidates named Ganjar Pranowo. We have faced several challenges, honestly, including pressure and obstructions from state officials and law enforcement who are supposed to be neutral. The government has also used social aid as a way to try to influence voters to vote for Prabowo, many intimidations, and many problems related with how to destruct the law, the national law related with how to bring his son to become the vice president. Transactional politics and vote buying is still very widespread and blatant, and including in my electoral districts in Maluku province, eastern parts of Maluku, nearby Papua province. Maluku, my constituent area, consists of 1,342 islands. So it's very complicated in political practices, and we face many problems related with the transactional politics and vote buying itself. I have tried to combat this by providing vote and civic education. I also try to emphasize the importance of voting for someone who is interested in the public goods rather than trying to advance their own interests, especially for the personal interest. I have also been the subject of coordinated social media attacks on my political character assassinations from candidates from other parties, particularly those parties from Prabowo candidates, president candidates coalitions party. Our team worked very hard day by day, counter this with publicizing a summary of my achievement during my last 2 terms as a member of parliament. And I think, yes, as a member of parliament, incumbent, as a candidate member of parliament, actually we face many problems in these terms compared with those 2 previous terms before. So that's why I can say that, yeah, in this term, we think that maybe we can bring the political practices on the track in Indonesia and become like benchmarking for the other Southeast Asia countries. But actually, yes, we face some many problems related with the political power abuse, authority abuse from above to the local governments. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih banyak. Thank you, merci, Chriesty Barends.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Over to Tanzania, to Lugangira. Could you tell us about the biggest obstacles facing women's participation in democratic processes in Tanzania, including for women running for elected office? Neema Lugangira, do you hear me?
Yes. Thank you very much. My name is Neema Lugangira. I'm a member of parliament in Tanzania, and I'm very excited and pleased to be here. Thank you so much for this opportunity. In Tanzania, like in many other countries, usually, especially African countries, culturally, there is usually a perception that, women shouldn't be in leadership. But we're grateful that over the years, Tanzania has transformed very progressively. And right now, we actually have the only female president and head of state, Her Excellency President Dr. Samia Suluhu Hassan, who's doing a tremendously great job. And with her being in office, it's also transforming the cultural perception of women in leadership. But when we're talking about biggest obstacles, I think the biggest one is the fear of gender-based violence in election. And when we're talking about gender-based violence in election, this is from the time, from the time within the party, electoral processes in the party, nomination, during election, and post-election. So the fear of gender-based violence plays a very huge role into blocking women coming forward. And then the other item is the capacity building and raising awareness for women to have that confidence of going forward and confidence of persevering and confidence of putting themselves out there in leadership position.
Thank you. Sticking with you, Neema Lugangira, I believe 37.4% of the members of Tanzania's National Assembly are women. This ranks Tanzania's legislature among the most gender balanced in Africa. Could you give us some examples of measures in your country to boost women's representation in politics?
Yes, we're very pleased that we are at about 37.4%, and this percentage actually it's as a result of a very affirmative action that was made in Tanzania, I think over 3 decades ago. In Tanzania, we have what we call the reserved quota. So in our constitution, 30% of members of parliament have to be women. And the way in which those 30% are found, each political party has its own internal election processes. And then at the end of the election, the National Electoral Commission looks at the percentage each party got at constituent level, and that determines the percentage or the number of special seats each party gets. However, for us to get from 37.4% to 50%, that means women need to go for elected positions. And at the moment, the elected percentage in our parliament, it's only about 9.1% of women elected, women members of parliament in constituency are women. And that requires a transformation in the electoral process, especially when it comes to the candidate nomination, which happens at party level. But very recently, just last month, actually, here in Tanzania, the Tanzanian parliament passed 3 bills related to political parties and election, whereby we have transformed the way in which political parties now, every political party now in Tanzania has to have a social and gender inclusion policy, which outlines what mechanisms and strategies are each party going to put in place to increase the number of representation of women in political positions within party, but as well as elected position. Now, another historic milestone is that every political party will need to have a gender desk that will be responsible of tackling issues related to gender complaints. But the other biggest milestone in Tanzania is the first country in Africa to recognize gender-based violence in election, gender-based violence in women in election as an electoral offense. So right now in our electoral act, gender-based violence in election is now an electoral offense, which is a huge milestone, which we believe will go towards ensuring that when we're in the electoral processes, people should avoid being abusive. Gender abuse in any form, be it for a woman, be it for a male, will not be acceptable. So, and this year, 2024, we have local government elections, and next year we have general elections. So at least from this year's local government election, we'll be able to test out this new GBV penalty if it happens in election, and if there will be any need of having any reforms, then at least we have time to do so before next year's general election. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and definitely some good examples there. Maybe we can discuss them later on to see if they would also be useful in other parts of the world. Thank you very much. Back to Indonesia, to Merci Chriesty Barends. Ibu Merci, you already gave us an insight on the situation in Indonesia in terms of women running for elected office and the most recent parliamentary elections. Could you give us some insights on the situation more broadly across Southeast Asia and the main obstacles facing women candidates and politicians in the region?
Thank you very much, Ms. Prudence. Actually, I want to give some perspective from Indonesia and Indonesia context about the women in politics in Indonesia after reformation movement.
Ibu Merci, I think we are having some technical difficulties with your connection. Maybe we come back to you in a moment, if that's okay. And I would therefore go back to Neema, Lugangira. Your honourable member, harassment of women politicians, of course, undermines the very essence of democratic governance, and this harassment is increasingly taking place online. Neema Lugangira, you are the chair of the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance. You're also active on enhancing digital skills and advancing gender inclusion online. Could you tell us about this work and efforts to tackle gender disinformation against women in politics? And after you, Neema, we come back and we try again with Ibu Merci in Indonesia.
Thank you very much. I think what I can say, first of all, is that like many parts of the world, the parliamentarians' involvement in digital inclusion, digital transformation discussion isn't at the same level as other stakeholders. Usually parliamentarians are somewhat left behind. So with the African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance, what we aim to achieve is to strengthen the role of African parliamentarians in digital development in Africa. So that first call to action for the network, APNIG, is to provide capacity building for members of parliament. And one of the areas that we've identified, which are crucial, is creating an enabling environment for women in politics to thrive online. Because when we're talking about we want to have more women in politics, we want to have more women in elected positions, these women need to be visible. For women to be visible, it means they need to be online. But the online space is horrific for women in politics. And this is the same for women in politics everywhere, every part of the country. So as parliamentarians, we have decided to tackle the issue of online gender-based violence by, one, raising awareness about it, calling it out, and saying that just because we're women members of parliament doesn't mean that we should accept being mistreated and abused online, and it doesn't mean that it is right for us to be abused or we should be expected to have thick skin. We need to call it out. Second thing that we're raising awareness on is when we're talking about freedom of expression, it's very important to realize that when someone is abusing you under the pretense of saying it's freedom of expression, that shouldn't be acceptable. We need to differentiate what is acceptable and what is not. And with women there, it's very important for us to be on top of these technological developments, because artificial intelligence, for example, is putting more and more risks on women in politics. So very quickly, some of the initiatives that we're currently doing is we're collaborating with different organizations across the world to address the issue of technology-facilitated gender-based violence, but also through the Interparliamentary Union, which is, all parliaments in 180 countries are members of the Interparliamentary Union. Currently, myself and a member of parliament from Canada, Honorable Michelle, are co-rapporteurs on an IPU resolution that is focused on the impact of artificial intelligence on democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. So we're trying to make these efforts to be like, you know what, as members of parliament, we shouldn't be put aside. We need to be at the forefront of this discussion. And finally, to conclude, I believe through the participation with the EU Parliament, we can start having conversations with tech companies, because tech companies, social media, the platform companies, have a social responsibility of making sure that their platforms are safe for all stakeholder groups to be on, including women parliamentarians. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's go back to Indonesia and try with Merci Chriesty Barends again. Ibu Merci, could you give us some insights on the situation more broadly across Southeast Asia and the main obstacles facing women politicians and indeed women candidates for political office? Ibu Merci.
Okay, thank you for these questions. Actually, as we know that Southeast Asia is one of the fastest growing region in the world, but in the other sides, related with the political perspective, political practices throughout Southeast was very determined, variable, influence the movement of democracy and politics in Southeast Asia. So Southeast Asia is heterogeneous of countries with diverse government system. State power vary, like Malaysia and Thailand are monarchy constitutional states. Indonesia, Philippines, Singapore implement the democratic system of the states. Brunei Darussalam and Malaysia implement the Muslim Sharia into the national states. And some of the Mekong river states like Laos, Myanmar, Cambodia, we can say that they implement the government system under a command and control of governments. So many variables related to implement the biggest transformations in the Southeast Asia. In the other side, women face many problems related with the domestic violence, women trafficking, migrant workers among the Asian countries, gender-based violence in multidimensional sectors, etc. But I want to share some point of view related with the Indonesian context that, as we know that after Reformation's era brought about democracy reform, there was a recognition that there needs to be more women representation in parliaments. Because of that, since 2003, Indonesian election law has required political parties to have women make up at least 30% of the legislative candidates. Furthermore, the 30% affirmative votes also applies to political party structures from national to the local level. Despite this measure, according to the research by the World Bank and Interparliamentary Union, Indonesia is also ranked 7th in women representations in parliaments in Southeast Asia and 105 ranked globally. There's a few reasons for this. First of all, culturally, there is a lot of pushback against women in leadership position, particularly in politics. Secondly, many political parties are very much male-dominated, masculinity perspective and practices, and that can limit the opportunities that women politicians can access. Just as quick example, Indonesia uses an open list system for legislative elections, and research has shown that candidates who are in the top 3 positions on the list are much more likely to be elected. But women candidates are much less likely to be selected for the top of the list. In 2024, only 7% of women legislative candidates were placed in number 1, 12% at number 2, and 26% at number 3. And even when they are elected, women are also less likely to be appointed to strategic position in parliamentary and the parliamentary committees. So for this election, the General Election Commission also allowed some parties to register fewer than 30% women candidates in central election districts, which is contrary to the prior practice, and there is no law enforcement. Many parties already talked to the national election, but they still run with this system. However, despite those obstacles, women representations and Indonesia's parliament has seen a lot of progress, rising from only 9% 1999 to 20.9% in 2019. And we still guarding the counting, and we will see the result of this election about the women participation in the parliament. Similar to Indonesian, women parliamentarians across Southeast Asia face many structural, cultural, and social economic barriers, as I mentioned before. Women parliamentarians are also vulnerable for both physical and online violence. In 2020-22 report on Asian women politicians by the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, 88% of women politicians interviewed said that they experience violence and harassment because of their political role. Several women members of Asian Parliamentarians of Human Rights has been the subject of these kinds of attacks, particularly those in Philippines. Senators Risa Hontiveros, former Senators Leila de Lima, and former MP Sarah Jane Alago, for example, has been the subject of many misogynistic online attacks, including gender slurs and insults about their physical appearance, and particularly in Myanmar, because Aung San Suu Kyi until now under house arrest, and the other NLD, Aung San Suu Kyi party, including women parliamentarians, now in the jail, and they got many atrocities from the junta militar. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih, and we now hear you loud and clear. Merci, Chriesty Barends. The European Parliament, of course, has also been very vocal on some of the individual cases that you mentioned, including that of former Senator Leila de Lima in the Philippines, and
That's
of course, the situation in Myanmar. We will stick with you because we have a good connection now. You mentioned ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights, of which you are the chair. You have a report, which I believe is every year, on parliamentarians at risk. What recommendations does APHR have in terms of addressing the underrepresentation of women in Southeast Asian politics? And you have some examples of successful initiatives in Indonesia or in Southeast Asia more broadly to empower women candidates.
Yes, actually, I think that the affirmative action quotes for women candidates like the one in Indonesia can be very effective in empowering women. How to increase the participations women in politics, quantitative and qualitatively, but they should be consistently enforced by all stakeholders, including election institutions, political party institution, and the other NGO, CSO work together to hand in hand to support the women in politics and increase the participation and women in parliaments. Furthermore, we have to push for reform all laws that have been identified as restricting women's rights to participate in politics. So I think as an incumbent, as a candidate, is one critical issue we have to put on the list as our agenda setting if we become the member of parliaments. The second is political parties should also commit to empowering women candidates. Firstly, by providing consistent political training and capacity building for women, not just when there's about to be an elections. The weak mentorship given to women candidates compared to men perpetuates the existing gender disparities in political representations. So the mentoringship is very important, because when we compare to the men candidates, they have a lot of networking mentors because they're always in the public space. So that's why mentorship is very important. It is crucial to ensure the women candidates are able to access the same resources, opportunity, and networking, and their male as their male counterparts. We should support each other instead of being at each other's throats and build a supportive networking system to fight against the structural barriers that we face. As women, also as women candidates, also we should put forward a cross-cutting and multi-sectoral agenda, because from the man perspective, the male candidate perspective, they always say that women always raise the issue related with the women, children, domestic issue, etc., etc. So women politicians must understand the struggle of women at grassroots level. For example, women and climate change, how climate change disproportionately affects women, has pushed millions of women and girls into poverty and hunger. In the other side, related with the water and sanitation, electricity, etc., etc. The government should also implement gender budgeting. For my example, in my position in gender committee, to ensure women receive equitable treatment, not just in politics, but in all sectors, including in education and healthcare. We together build up strategic allies with the other women parliamentarian from the other parties to increase the social networking, especially social healthcare, social education system, etc., etc., as a social safety net equally for men, women, children, etc. Because how can women enter politics when they are still struggling in other essential aspects of life? Addressing women's involvement in politics demands a comprehensive approach that goes beyond the single political tools or strategy. So the implementations of other existing policies for women, such as gender mainstreaming or anti-sexual violence against women, must be equally championed. We must also create more opportunities for women to participate in public policy making, not necessarily just in politicians, but extra parliamentarians movement, women in many, many sectors. It is essential to not limit expectations solely to women entering politics or women candidates. Women across various fields of development must be afforded ample opportunities to engage, such as women academy, women in environmental sectors, women in other fields. Strengthening women coalition and network is important to ensure this diverse representation. And the last one, how to set up the agenda setting togetherness among all women movement. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih banyak. Thank you, Ibu Merci. Let's now go to Sweden, to Evin Incir, and following that we will go to the United States, to Congresswoman Titus. Evin Incir, here in the European Parliament, we're at almost 40%. I believe I checked yesterday, it's 39.7% of European Parliament members are women. In the current EU executive, the European Commission, it's now the most gender balanced in its history. We have the first European Commission president. We also have the European Central Bank, which is headed by a woman. Yet improved representation of women in political life, in the political sphere, can come to naught if they fall victim of harassment as soon as they reach public office. What recommendations would you have for making the world of politics less hostile to women politicians and to women candidates? Evin Incir, we don't hear you.
So now maybe I had
Yes.
the microphone. No, I said first and foremost, it is correct, of course, that there is almost 40% of women representation within the European Parliament, and half is also, it's 50-50 in the EU Commission. But this didn't came by itself. It came after women putting pressure on the different parties, on the Commission also. We from the Socialists and Democrats, for example, one of our demands on the current president of the Commission was that she needs to promise that it will be a 50-50 representation. And with representation, of course, comes also different experiences. But representation is not enough. It's one important, very important, of course, step, so that young women and girls, or young girls, can also see themselves in those who they represent, and that they can feel that they also could actually be a part of making change. But when there is no representation, then also the step in for women and girls into politics is much further away. However, that needs to be followed out with concrete policies and also cultural change. It needs to, for example, we need to ensure that we take the combat and the struggle against violence against women and girls in public position, including in politics, to ensure that that women actually dares to make their voice loud. Because right now, even me in my position as a legislator, sometimes think 1, 2, 3 times before I make a post in a social media and take part in the public debate. If I feel like that, being in this position, I can just imagine how many young girl feels who hasn't yet taken the step into politics. And to be honest, also 2019, when I was running for parliamentarian for the first time, when I understood that there is a big chance that I will be elected also, I was not sure that I really wanted at some point, because I was afraid of what will follow with a candidacy and what will follow with me being elected against me, but also against people around me. So we need an awareness. We need increased awareness. We need to ensure that there is legislation that combats and prevents violence against women in politics. We need to ensure that there is support to women. I actually had a conversation with a woman, not in politics, but she was a journalist, 1-2 years ago, I think it was, in a public conversation. And then she gave her experience, and she told us that she was a victim of gender-based violence on social medias. She went to the police in Germany, where she was from, and the police, instead of helping her, told her, maybe you are too opinionated. How is it possible that the law enforcement, who should actually support you, is telling you to cut down on your opinions? No, this woman shouldn't have been told to be cut down on her opinion. Rather, she should have been asked, okay, or told how she could get the support and help that she needed. Both, of course, help for her personally, but also legislative-wise, how to ensure that the perpetrators are found and also put in front of justice. So awareness, legislation, support, and representation also. So all of it needs to really happen at the same time and in parallel.
Tack så mycket. Thank you, Evin Incir. Let's go now to the United States. Congresswoman Titus, you served in the Nevada State Senate for 2 decades before being elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2009. Having first run for elected office over 35 years ago, how do you think the challenges and obstacles facing women candidates differ now?
Well, first, thank you for having me with this outstanding group of women parliamentarians. It's a pleasure to join you. Yes, I first ran in 1988. When I ran, there were very few women in the state legislature. Of 21 in the Senate, there were only 3 women. And of 42 in the Assembly, there were only 10. So the one main thing that has changed is that there are now more women getting engaged in politics, either as organizers, as campaign managers, or as candidates themselves. So the field has opened up a bit, but we still haven't reached parity. Jeanette Rankin became the first woman to be sworn into Congress in 1917. And since then, we've had 400 women in Congress. Now, that compares to about 10,000 men who have served in Congress over that same period. And then, as I said, we've gotten better. There are 40 in this current Congress, but it's still only 28% of the Congress members are women, and yet we are a little over 50% of the general population. So obviously some of the challenges that were there in 35 years ago are still there today. It was real discouraging to see a Pew Group poll recently that focused just on this topic and how many women feel that there are some unfair or at least challenging things that they have to overcome that men don't. The first thing is that women have to work harder, work longer, and prove themselves more than men do. You have to have more qualifications, show that you can do the job, prove yourself. A man can just kind of assume that he can do the job, and so he can walk into a nomination that a woman can't. There's also just general gender discrimination, as y'all have described, in society. Starting when you're a little child in school, you have books that teach women to go in one direction and men can go in another. Little girls can be a teacher, but a man can be a hero and a firefighter. So those prejudices are ingrained in our culture and our society, and they spill over into politics too. A third thing is that women get less support from party leaders. When party leaders are looking for candidates, they don't necessarily look to women. And when they are looking to promote people within the party or assign people to certain committee positions or leadership positions, they're more inclined to go to men than they are to women, and that continues today. I said that the school looks different for men and women, but in that poll, 41% of the women said that they weren't encouraged to go into politics from the time that they were little. It used to be you ask a child, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it was an astronaut or president, and that came from little boys, not from little girls. And little girls also tend to not study the kind of topics that make for good background and good experience in order to go into politics. Now, some of the things that have changed is that it's now easier for women to raise money. There are organizations that help women raise money, and women are recognized as being less corrupt or less likely to be corrupt than men, so they're willing to give women more money. So that's one thing. Those organizations that I mentioned are like Emily's List. It's an acronym, EMILY. Early money is like yeast. If you give early to a candidate, it can grow and rise and help that candidate to succeed. So that's available. One of the things, though, that hasn't changed is the focus on women's looks. The press will never say, oh, that guy had on a tacky tie. But if your dress is too short or your earrings are too big or you look real frumpy, that will become part of the story. And so that's still too much of a focus in politics of how the candidates look. You've heard it in the commentary on debates sometimes when they compare one candidate to another in a debate. It's often about style as opposed to substance. So that hasn't changed. And one other thing that hasn't changed, even with these new 24-hour news cycles and more money and more women running, is the issues that women kind of get pigeonholed in. Some of this is our own fault because we run for these kind of reasons, but it's usually family, fertility, and food. That's what they ask women about. What do you think about child care? What do you think about birth control? What do you think about family, fertility, and food? You don't hear them asking women, well, what do you think about nuclear proliferation? Or how do you think we should reform the tax structure? So we get kind of siloed or pigeonholed into certain kind of issues. Now, that's good because if we weren't dealing with those issues, men probably wouldn't be, like domestic violence, for example. But it's bad in the sense that that's all they think we can talk about as opposed to being experts on these other issues as well.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Let's stick with you. You serve also as the ranking member of the House Democracy Partnership, a bipartisan commission that works with legislators across the world on strengthening democratic institutions and deepening bilateral relations. Can you tell us about the House Commission's work on empowering and enhancing women's inclusion in democratic processes?
Well, yes, HDP is working together with you today to sponsor this program with women legislators. I love serving on this commission because it allows me to contact other legislators. It's not executive to executive, but legislator to legislator. And we try to share some of our best practices of how our Congresses work with other parliamentarians and try to learn from them what are some of the challenges or things that they're facing. We do a lot of work through IRI and NDI. Those are two subgroups within the State Department, semi-autonomous, who often organize seminars with women candidates, exchanges where women candidates come here or we go there to do a program. They try to focus on some of those issues like violence against women that people are very concerned about. We convene legislators. We just did a forum in Chile with a number of people from around Latin America, women who came to discuss about women's economic empowerment, because often if you are a mother, you stay home until your children grow up and then you tend to run for office, not at a young age. But if you have some economic independence, then you may be able to do that sooner. So we often gather women legislators. We have seminars with them. We try to talk about topics that they're interested in. Corruption is a big one. You know, we say often in the HDP, women are the agents of change. And if you're going to make some changes, whether it's doing away with corruption or changing the structure of the legislature so more women can participate, like having a slate, for example, with a quota, that's going to come about because women are pushing those changes, not because men are, because they're happy with the status quo. But HDP tries to work with women all around the world who are in the legislature to show how you can run for office, how you can serve your constituents, and how you can actually write policy. And then in return, I learned how you all do things, and between our two sides, we hope to move the process forward.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And you said about learning from each other. You also mentioned, I think, about the current statistic. It's around 30% of House of Representatives members are women, which is the highest percentage, I think, in the history of Congress.
That's right.
Could you give us, even though it's not nearly high enough, of course, but could you give us some examples of initiatives or best practice to boost the representation of women on Capitol Hill, and indeed any best practice that you have encountered as part of your work with the House Democracy Partnership?
Well, I mentioned Emily's List. That's an organization that will endorse women candidates and contribute money to their campaigns or help them to raise money. So that's an important outside group. Within the Congress, we have an equality caucus that deals with women's issues and a women's caucus that is bipartisan. It's not just one party, because while you might disagree on some things, there are some specifically women issues that we can all agree on. We can agree on women's health issues. We can agree on the need for child care. Certainly we can agree on stopping violence against women. I'll tell you a little story. While I was in the legislature, I had teamed up with a woman who was very conservative, opposite of me on most issues. But we introduced a bill called potty parity. Now, if you think about public buildings and when women's restrooms and men's restrooms, where are the long lines? That's at a ball game or at a theater or even in a public building. Long lines are going into the women's restroom, not the men's. That's because it takes women longer with biology, but women often are helping their mothers or older people, or they're helping children, younger people. They're carrying packages. It takes longer. So we decided that we would require public buildings to include more bathrooms for women because it was not only inconvenient, but unhealthy and not practical economically to make women stand in line a long time, but not men. And so that was something all women can agree on. It didn't have to be partisan. So there are things like that you find issues where you can agree with each other within different parties or among different parties, or you can find a man who will co-sponsor something with you. And so it's not the whole broad platform, but it's specific issues that you can do. And I talked about HDP sponsoring a number of conferences, which I think are great, and training programs also are great. Another thing we do here is have internships bright young students come and work in our offices. And I always try to encourage young women to do that, because you get firsthand experience, not just what you study in school, but you actually see it and participate in it. And that's another way we encourage young women to go into politics. We don't have a quota in the U.S. We're behind you all. Some of you may have quotas, either in terms of who's on the slate or who gets the nomination, or what percent of women have to be in the legislature. We're far behind Latin America, for example.
Thank you, Congresswoman. So we have about 4 or 5 minutes left. If possible, I would like to get back to each of you for some final remarks, some follow-up. I would go first maybe to Neema Lugangira. If you want to respond to anything that the other legislators have made or any final remarks. There's been a number of examples of best practice shared. We just had a Congresswoman who mentioned Emily's list, ways of supporting female candidates. We had mentions also of gender budgeting, quotas, including in Tanzania, where they have the reserved quota and they have 30% of women. Also, I think it was Neema Lugangira who mentioned the gender desk in political parties and penalties for gender-based violence. A number of you have also mentioned training and capacity building, and importantly, not just having that training just before elections. It should be continuously. Some mentions too of the role of social media, tackling disinformation, and lists in countries that have list systems, including some of them in the European Union, ensuring that women are ranked high on the list, and of course also the role of male politicians and what they can do differently. So I invite you all to make some final remarks, and let's start with you, Neema Lugangira in Tanzania.
Thank you very much. And I think I'll start with where you just ended about the role that our male colleagues can play. As I mentioned earlier, just last month, we passed 3 bills in Parliament related to election and political parties. And out of all the members of Parliament who contributed and advocated for gender-based violence in election to be recognized as an electoral offense, about 80% were actually male, our male colleagues. So what we managed to do is we managed to advocate, convince, and get their buy-in, so much so that they carried their agenda as their agenda. And even when we were deliberating on the topics, they would also come on and kind of strengthen the argument we were making. So I think it's very important to also find those allies, find the male allies within the Parliament or Congress. The other thing that I think is very important is to see, for example, on this call, there's so much rich experience and knowledge and understanding of how different countries do different things with the same aim. So I think we need to do more of these and perhaps organize learning missions. Women parliamentarians from Africa coming to the US to learn in Congress or the EU, and identifying countries that have lists. The list, or is it the list process or the candidate quotas? I think there can be a lot of enrichment when we can learn from each other, because even when we're tabling these arguments in our parliament, or we're trying to initiate change, having such references and evidence, makes the argument so much more stronger. So I think I would highly recommend that, and I'm very happy for this discussion. I've learned a lot, and yeah, I look forward to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you, and some more good ideas. Thank you, Neema Lugangira, from joining us from the National Assembly of Tanzania. Let's now go back to Indonesia, to Chriesty Barends for some brief final remarks.
Thank you, James, for my final remarks. I can say that to increase the participations, women participations in politics, whether qualitatively or quantitatively, there are some important issues to become like a roadmap for all of us. First, related with the agenda setting. How can we set up the agenda setting among all the women politicians and the other stakeholders, especially women movement, women organizations, to set up agenda setting together related with the positioning of women, capacity building for women, and networking, mentorships, documentations, and database, and especially related with the how to develop the woman leadership platform. So it's very, very important for us, because when we become a woman parliamentarian, we are a leader. So we have to make the other women leaders to emerge in all our program and activities. The second one is related with the other institutions, how to make them engage with the women movement to increase the participation in politics, especially for political parties and policymakers, must take concrete action to work towards a gender inclusive and equitable society, including by providing more opportunities for women, advocating for inclusive laws, and ensuring the sexist attitudes have no place in governments and public life. The third one is related with the gender budget, because the gender budget is very, very important. How to increase the woman empowerment, gender-based development program, something like that. So women can access many social safety nets for education, for health, how to increase their capacity in politics, women and agricultural, women and fishery, etc., etc. It's very important. And the other one is related with domestic violence, especially for the sexual violence among the women face many problems related with this situation. So when we talk about how to bring women or young man, a young girl or young woman into the politics, we have to do like a parallel actions, the strategic issues and the infraction issues related in multi-dimensional aspects for women. And we do hope that the woman in politics is not responsible only for women, but for all stakeholders, for men, for society, for governments, for private sectors, journalists, press, whatever. So this is my point of view related with how to increase the woman participation in politics. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih. Thank you, Ibu Merci, and thank you for joining us so soon after your own House of Representatives elections in Indonesia. Let's now go back to the US, to Congresswoman Titus for some closing remarks.
Well, thank you. Just responding to some of the things that my colleagues have said. You know, this is a huge year for elections. There are elections all around the country, more people voting than any time in the past. And the key is not only having women run for office, but getting women to turn out to vote, because women will elect other women if they see them doing things that relate to their own lives. And so we've got to not just start at the top, but also be sure that we get women engaged at the other levels of government, and voting is the key. It was mentioned that we need for women to be mentors. And, you know, so often, if there are only 5 seats at the table and a woman only gets 1, then it becomes very competitive, and they're likely to want to protect that 1 seat as opposed to share it with other women. And so we are our own fault. Instead of mentoring other women to come along, we often shut them out or find them as competition as opposed to somebody who will strengthen our position. So we do need to do a better job of voting. You also mentioned social media and what a role it plays. And now that we have AI, that's going to make politics even more difficult. They can change your voice, they can steal your face, they can create an image, and women will be more susceptible to that, I'm afraid, than men. And if I could just conclude by sharing with you some statistics. we find that there are statistics that show that countries are more secure when women are involved in their government. They're more secure in terms of food security, in combating violent extremism, and in conflict resolution. And listen to these numbers. Women's participation in peace negotiations makes these discussions 64% less likely to fail. So if women are at the table in a peace negotiation, they're much more successful. And 35% of those that are successful tend to last at least 15 years. So we need to be sure we're not only at the legislative table, but also at the foreign policy table or in any kind of peace negotiations, because our being there can make a real difference and make a difference over the long term. So thank you so much for letting me participate with you this morning.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And another very important point there on peace negotiations, a whole other conversation we can have, and something that certainly we have seen in my own country of Ireland, the importance of having women at the very front when it comes to peace negotiations. Let's now go back to Sweden, and apologies for running a little bit over time, for some closing remarks from Member of the European Parliament, Evin Incir.
Thank you very much. I would like to start up with the importance of having an intersectional perspective into all the work that we are doing. And then also continue on mentioning the 3 R's that has been the core of the former Swedish government, because the current right-wing one has abolished it, but former social democratic government with our former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Margot Wallström, introduced and initiated the 3 R's as the core of the feminist foreign policy that Sweden had previously. And in those 3 R's represents rights, representation, and resources. And those also goes into, I would say, the same tools that could and is important to ensure that we ensure more women in politics and defend our democracy. But because in the end, it's about defending both human rights and democracy. So rights for women and girls are essential, both civil rights and social rights. Representation, crucial, of course. I think one of the most successful ways is quota. My own party, for example, have had quota since beginning of the 1990s, and that means they're always in all the party lists. 50% of women are women and 50% are men. But it is equally important that we ensure that women are in high position on those lists, so that it's not men first, and the constituency is only represent or have one person, which means that only a man gets elected. So we need to ensure that women, there is quotas, and also women are high on the different lists. And then, of course, the resources that has already also been mentioned, on both financial resources, but also political, different kind of political support. Then I want to add another point also, and that is the importance of allies. The importance of men also joining the struggle, because we know that gender equal societies are also good for men and boys, and we need to start talking about having the conversation in an early age, so that boys are not taught that they can act in certain ways, they can succeed in politics and in public position, while women roles are staying at home. So also allies, men allies are super important in this struggle, because every and each of us wins on gender equal societies, beyond sexism, beyond macho cultures that unfortunately is still deep rooted in many of our societies.
Tack så mycket. Thank you, Evin Incir, and excellent sentiment that you ended on there. We're all winners in a gender equal society. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our 4 parliamentarians, our 4 legislators who joined us from Indonesia, Sweden, Tanzania and the United States. The conversation and the collaboration continues. It's just a start. Many thanks to all of our viewers also, and to all of those of you who are viewing from the European Union or any EU citizens around the world. A reminder to cast your vote in the European elections from the 6th to the 9th of June. You can find more information and set yourself a reminder at elections.europa.eu, elections.europa.eu. and a very happy International Women's Day tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, James.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Turn my
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.